Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Trusted Trustee podcast. And as usual, I'm joined by Tracey Bestis from the Southern Highlands of New South Wales. How are you, Tracey? It's great to see you as usual.
Thank you so much, Darin. I am doing really well, thank you. And it's a beautiful day here in sunny Southern Highlands.
Sunny, but no doubt bloody freezing.
We don't mention that part.
This podcast is brought to you by Superfund Property Valuations. Take the tension out of tax time by making Superfund Property Valuations your number one choice for all of your SMSF property valuation requirements. Order a report today by filling in your details online at superfundpropertyvaluations.com.au and let Superfund Property Valuations take care of the hard work. And thank you, of course, usually to William Spark and his team there. No doubt they're working tirelessly on valuations as we near the 30th of June, and they do a fabulous job. I think I mentioned last time that I heard him take an inquiry about how you value wind farms in your SMSF if you did have a wind farm. So all sorts of great stuff there. So go to the experts, and of course we thank them for their continued support. And well, we're not actually talking about valuations as such, but we are talking about different sorts of assets today. And this is going to be sort of our next series of what we do. And it's going to be about unusual assets, or sometimes referred to as personal use assets or collectibles, aren't we, Tracey? And that should be interesting because a little bit of a misconception about how many SMSFs actually do invest in this area, but no doubt, I'm sure that a lot of people, it does certainly open people's eyes when you discuss these topics. And, some people say that, oh, can you invest in that in a super fund? So it does pique interest like that, but I think a bit of a misconception that, oh, people are only opening an SMSF to do this. Well, no, I don't think that the statistics support that, but nonetheless, a great opportunity for people to invest in these sorts of things. So what are we talking about, Trace?
Yeah, thanks, Darren. So it is an interesting topic, this one, I think, because you're right. We don't see a whole lot of SMSFs, and I actually don't have. I tried to go looking for the stats, but the ATO link to their data table is not working at the moment. So
Oh,
note to the ATO, if you're listening, you need to fix up your link to the data table so we can actually share the numbers of SMSFs that have collectibles in them. But we don't see it all the time, Darren, but we do see it, right? So we're still seeing most of the SMSFs in the marketplace are investing in listed securities and cash and term deposits. That's, over 40 something percent of SMSFs have those assets, which is fair enough. But when we're looking at collectibles, we're talking a whole range of things. So the ones that come to mind for most people would be artwork, maybe
yeah.
sort of some sort of jewelry, maybe a wine collection, Darren,
Mhm.
all of these kind of really interesting things. And when we start to think about investing in these collectibles or otherwise called personal use assets, we have to come back to the crucial thing that we talk about all the time in the SMSF space, and that's the sole purpose test. So if
Yeah.
you want to invest in these particular types of collectibles or personal use assets, you still have to go back and meet that sole purpose test. So the purpose of the asset is to provide retirement benefits to you, not because you want to say, well, I actually have a Lamborghini in my SMSF. Thank you very much.
Yeah, no,
So it's important to know that.
it's a great point to make, Tracy, and maybe people should think about it in that you've basically got to make an investment case for every single asset that you're looking at to put into your fund. I mean, it can't just be on a whim to say, oh, I like Grange Hermitage, so I think that would be a great idea to put some in my SMSF. You've
Yeah.
actually got to make a case for why it would be a good idea to do that. And of course, with a lot of these assets, they would. I mean, if you have a good eye for art, say, for example, you do know that the asset should actually uh, appreciate.
Appreciate it.
And
Yeah.
of course, that will achieve the aim of the sole purpose test or whatever. But be that as it may, the appreciation of the asset can't be a by the by thing. It can't be the fact that, oh, I want to uh, buy a Monet painting and put it in my SMSF when the motivation is to buy the Monet painting, not necessarily because everybody knows that a Monet original will obviously appreciate in value, but
Yeah, exactly.
it's got to be the top of mind thing. It can't be like the peripheral thing that, oh no, but hang
Exactly.
on, of course it's going to appreciate, but no, can't do it in reverse. Got to put forward the case properly.
Exactly, Dan. It's got to be that sole purpose. And the one big thing that so let's just go back a step about types of collectibles. So we've got artwork, fairly obvious that one, and we're talking paintings, sculptures, drawings, photographs, engravings, anything of that kind of arty sort of spectrum there. Jewelry, so we could have some lovely diamonds in our SMSF if we choose to. Anything that's got so antiques, artifacts, memorabilia, um, postage stamps and first day covers. I used to collect first day covers when I was a child. I was mentioning that to Darin before we actually started recording the podcast
Yes.
today. And I recently found some bicentennial first day covers, not to age me at all. So you could have postage stamp collections. Anything that's kind of like a rare folio, manuscript, or book that would fit into the collectibles kind of regime. Wine and spirit collections, we talked about that a little bit. We'll come back to that. Motor vehicles and motorcycles, that could come into the collectibles personal use asset section. Recreational boats. At this point in time, people are probably going, what do you mean you would have any of this sort of stuff in your SMSF? And this one I think is really interesting. Memberships of a sporting club or a social club. That kind of is a collectible.
Oh, I
Why would
wasn't
you have that
aware
in
of
your
that.
SMSF? Who knows?
Well, it's a good question. Maybe this should lead us on to our next point that and perhaps it's a little bit deceptive to categorize these items as personal use assets because
Yes,
basically if it's in your SMSF, you can't use them
you
for your
can't use
personal
it.
use, right? So
That's right.
there's no real point having a Lamborghini like you first suggested because well, you won't be able to drive it, number one. You know,
Exactly.
what's the point of having a sporting club membership? Because as the member, you won't be able to use it. So unless it's
Mm,
transferable for somebody else or somebody else can take advantage of it, you as the SMSF member won't be able to. So there are all sorts of restricting rules.
correct.
Like for example, with artwork, you can't hang it in your lounge room or whatever. That's got to be displayed in an art gallery or some sort of other place of storage. So
Yes,
it's a little bit deceptive saying they're personal use assets because you
it
can't
really is.
use them personally. But I've got a bit of a gripe with that because I've always thought to myself, Tracy, what difference does it make if I buy a Monet and hang it in my lounge room? Well, okay,
Yeah,
I get to look at it every day, and that's fantastic. But you know, if it appreciates, haven't aren't we achieving the right thing as
yeah.
far as the outcome goes? But of course, then it comes back to, oh, but you can't get a personal benefit straight away, and that probably
It's
goes into the
coming back.
category of of personal like the good old Myers card example that I think we've discussed in the past, where the shopper discount you
Yeah.
just get Myers shares because you want the shopper discount anymore because they've slightly changed the category of those shares. So I suppose it goes into that category. So it's not just bed and roses
No, it is not,
or
Darin,
beer and
unfortunately.
Skittles, or wine and Skittles, I suppose, in this instance, when you're looking at investing in these types of assets.
Yes, you're absolutely right, Darren. And I think the coming back to your point about the Monet on the living room wall, you might have to take a screen grab of your share portfolio in the SMSF and frame that and hang that on your wall. That would be acceptable. Having the Monet owned by the super fund and hanging on your wall is definitely not allowed. So, and it really just comes back to that sole purpose. What is the sole purpose of having this particular investment? And certainly one of the factors of a collectible and a non-personal use asset is what we should be calling it, is that you can't have any personal use. So it can't be a personal use item for you as the trustee or member or any related party of yours. So you certainly can't hang the artwork. If we use artwork as the example, you can't hang the artwork in your place of residence. And the ATO, back in 2016, Darin took it one step further to say that not only can you not hang the artwork in your place of residence, but you cannot store the collectible in your place of residence. So if it is a collectible, because that's kind of like, yes, it's stored in the safe, and actually the safe is on the lounge room wall, because people try and get around things. So the ATO went one step further. So you
So,
cannot store the collectibles at home.
so in the context of that, if you had wine in your SMSF, where would you put it?
Well, you'd have to store it off-site. You'd have to store it at actually a cellar. And if you think about trying to look after the asset of the super fund, it would really need to be temperature controlled. You've got to have insurance over that collectible as well. So that's another element of the requirements of having a collectible and non-personal use asset. So you can't just store these things at home. You can't have that storage there. So now that kind of then leads to you to say, well, what about if I stored my artwork at my office? And so potentially you could store the artwork at your office, but you can't display the artwork at your office.
Oh, okay. All right. I
So
actually didn't even think you could do it at your office, but okay, you've got a
the,
slight
There's
flexibility.
a slight thing there. So obviously, if you can't display it at your office, why are you going to store it at your office, right? So, so that kind of rules it out. But technically, the restriction is around storing it at your residence. I work from home, so I'm kind of screwed either way. But yes, so you can't actually have any personal use by you or a related party of these collectibles. So that's the kind of first thing. So you can't lease it either. So let's say that you've got a particular motor vehicle. We've got the Lamborghini SMSF, and you want to lease that Lamborghini out to a related party or yourself. Well, you can't do that either. You can't actually lease any of the assets personally or via a related party. And the big kicker, Darin, the storage is a big kicker, but the biggest one I think is insurance. And this is
Yeah,
where most of these things kind of fall over because you must have a separate insurance policy for the collectible. So if you were storing your Monet at the art gallery and the art gallery had general insurance over all of the paintings in the art gallery, that actually wouldn't suffice the SMSF collectible rules because you would have to then still have your own separate insurance policy. And so that's kind of where it gets a little bit tricky for most people because the insurance policy might be unaffordable or
yeah,
unattainable to start with. And if it's either of those things, if it's unattainable or unaffordable, then the SMSF can't hold that particular collectible.
yeah. It's a really interesting point. I remember when I was first sort of looking at these rules, and I probably couldn't believe how almost counterintuitive they are, and of course complicates the issue of holding these assets. I mean, I remember this is years ago, there was a big debate about insurance, particularly with artwork, to say whether
Yes.
or not the art gallery's policy was sufficient enough to cover the asset. And you would
Yeah.
think it would be because the gallery is obviously going to have sufficient insurance to cover all of the stuff on display within the four walls. But
Yeah.
no, it was. I mean, I know a few people argued against it, a few people tested it
Yeah.
out, but the ruling was eventually no. You've got to have a separate policy under the SMSF's name to
Yes.
insure those assets. And as you say, it's not necessarily the easiest thing to go about doing and
No.
securing. So that in itself, forget about personal use or non-personal use. That technical detail in itself can pretty much sometimes rule out whatever asset class you're talking about in this sphere or category.
That is very true, Darin. And like I just to reiterate what I was saying before, if you can't get the insurance or you don't want to pay for the insurance, then you actually can't hold the asset in the SMSF. So you would have to dispose of the asset from the SMSF, which is not necessarily a bad thing. If you still want to hold that particular asset, you just don't get the concessional tax environment that the asset's sitting in.
Yeah, and it's a bit of a double whammy, isn't it? Trace, because if you're looking at, let's say, using artwork as the example again, if you have to go
Mm.
out and get your individual insurance for that artwork under the super fund's name, but it's displayed in a gallery, because that's a little bit of a quirky arrangement, you know that the premium's going to be higher for that
Yeah, that's
arrangement too, because insurance companies, unlike, well, not unlike any other organization, is that they'll charge you more if it's a little bit out of the ordinary. They've probably got to put a
yeah.
little bit more time into it. Of course, you as the consumer will pay for it. So that's kind of like another hurdle that would probably discourage people from going down
Yeah.
this path as appealing as it might seem just on face value and from the outset.
Yeah, and I think you can kind of gauge the regulator's opinion on these things, Darren, by the difficulty and all of the steps that you have to go through that the regulator says, no, you have to do this and you have to do this and you have to do this. You can kind of gauge where they feel about or how they feel about collectibles inside of an SMSF.
All right, so well, there's some of the compliance issues that people are obviously
Yeah,
going to have to address. But why don't we step it back one bit further and actually discuss how do we go about purchasing these things? Like, what are the
yeah,
rules around purchasing? Because we know that there's all different sorts of rules around acquisitions of different assets within an SMSF. So naturally
yeah.
enough, there are going to be specific rules for this category of asset too. So what are some of those rules?
Of course. Of course. And there's a few. There's a few. So I guess the first step is that we cannot acquire a collectible from ourselves. So the super fund can't buy it from me or anyone related to me, any party associate of mine. So that because that would fall foul of Section 66, which is that acquisition of assets from a member or a related party, and there is no exception or provision under that section to allow for collectibles. So that's the first no-no. You can't. So if I want to go and purchase some artwork or a wine collection or my Lamborghini as a collectible in my SMSF, I can't buy that from myself. I could buy it from you, Darin, because you are not a related party of mine. And if we step way back, I don't know what episode it was when we did the whole conversation about who's a related party. If anyone wants to go back and listen to that episode, then they'll be able to understand who's a related party. Get your pen and paper ready, kind of thing. So that's the first thing. So you need to acquire it from somebody non-related to you. Now, you also then have to think about, well, how am I going to prove the ownership and the acquisition of this particular asset? Because it's not like, and some of the collectibles will have some sort of trading platform, if you like, or some sort of art house or a gallery or whatever. But how do you actually go ahead and prove the ownership? And so you really need to make sure that you've got the documentation in place. And so the first thing, of course, you would have to do, Darin, and we haven't said it yet, 20 minutes in, is that we would need to check our trust deed. So we would need to read the deed. Does our trust deed actually allow us to invest in this particular type of asset class to start with? If not, can't do it until we upgrade the trust deed. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, well, what contracts or what purchase documentation, such as a tax invoice, what do we have to show that we have purchased this asset? And please make sure that it's in the name of the SMSF trustee. Please don't put it in your personal name unless you are the individual trustee of the SMSF, because as soon as you've got a tax invoice in the wrong name, the auditor is not going to be happy. So let's get that part right. We also need to then have our insurance policy documents. So that's proof of ownership as well. Have we actually got that in place? We do need to, one of the other requirements, Darin, for these collectibles is that we do need to have a trustee minute or resolution as to where these collectibles are stored and why we've made the decisions of where to store this stuff. We may need to have a trustee declaration as well to say, well, we have invested in X, Y, and Z, and the reason we've done that is X, Y, and Z. Your auditor might actually want to see more of a declaration so you can show that you have followed all of the required rules. And I sometimes say, well, maybe if you need to show ongoing ownership of this particular asset, You might want to have a photograph of the asset that's taped and time stamped or with the newspaper or whatever. Remember, you can't have the asset in your home, so it's not a photo that you can take at home because the asset should not be there. So yeah, any proof of ownership that's just to help the auditor because they can't just go and do a search of an ASX share registry to be able to show that you own that asset.
Yeah, and it's obviously going to pique attention for auditors and anybody scrutinizing the SMSF
Sure.
because they are standout assets because they're so individually unique that they
Yes.
know that once you see one of those things, they know that there's a whole raft of rules that need to be followed as we've discussed. So
Yeah.
obviously they're going to run a closer eye over some of those records and they won't just brush over and say that oh, that's okay because they know that if they get scrutinized, that's going to be one flag that immediately comes up on the
Yeah.
ATO or whoever's attention.
Yes, exactly. And one thing I just want to clarify about collectibles, Darren, is just the whole gold and banknote or coins and gold and silver and banknotes and bullion and medallions, etc. So, because some of it will be collectibles and other parts won't be collectibles. So the rules that we're talking about around collectibles, not storing at home, all of the insurance, blah blah blah, are for that's for collectibles. So what is a collectible in terms of gold or medallion or a banknote? So if you've got a coin where the value is of that coin, the market value of that coin is more than the face value, then it's going to be a collectible. If you've got a gold bar and the value is based on the weight of that gold bar, that's not going to be collectible. That's going to be a separate asset itself. So if it's not a collectible, like I could have a gold bar and I could store that at my home as a trustee because it's not a collectible, provided it's not a collectible. So would I choose to and would I want to? Well, I certainly would want to be really careful about the security measures that I have around storing that asset at home. But it's just a different concept. So you've got to just remember what is the collectible, what is not a collectible, because the rules are slightly different. And if I've got a gold coin or I've got a banknote, and that's classified as a collectible, then I have to remind myself as well that that's not cash or currency. So if I want to take that money out of my super fund at some point in time, and I've got this rare $5 note, well, that's not going to be a way of paying a pension payment to myself, Darren, because it's not cash.
Yeah, I would hazard a guess, Tracy, if someone was as unfocused as to try and use a collectible banknote or coin to make a payment or something like that, they probably shouldn't be an SMSF trustee in the first place because I
Correct.
probably don't think that they've got enough focus on what needs to be done to make that sort of structure work somehow. But I mean, who knows?
Exactly.
I can be a little bit flippant about it, of course, but there's all sorts of different currencies now with cryptocurrency and all that sort of stuff. I'm not suggesting that that's a collectible in any way, shape, or form, but it
No.
just pollutes the field a little bit that there's different currencies and different sorts of
Yeah.
similar assets, I suppose you could say, not the same, but
Yeah.
similar, that can sort of, cloud people's judgment and get them a little bit confused about what they can and they can't do.
Exactly, exactly. And I think that's part of the whole superannuation space, Darren, is sometimes you would think that you'd be able to do something, but just like we said before, that you can't store these assets at your home, even though you are the trustee of an SMSF, then that's something that is unfamiliar to people because they, would assume that you could do that and you actually can't do it. So maybe we'll talk quickly about getting these assets out of the super fund and
Yeah,
what can you do and what can't you do.
disposing
Is that
them.
okay? So we can actually, so unlike the fact that we can't buy one of these collectible assets from ourselves, in reverse, that's not true though. So if the super fund wants to sell an asset to me, it wants to sell me that bottle of Grange, then it can do so. but we need to have a qualified valuer's market valuation to do that. So I can't just jump on winedirect.com.au or whatever a website is and look up the bottle of Grange and say, yep, that's cool. It actually needs to be a qualified independent valuation. I can't, so I can sell it to myself. I can physically buy that asset from the super fund. If I've met condition of release, I can take a lump sum payment of that bottle of wine from my super fund. I cannot crack that bottle of wine open every month as my pension payment.
Oh, that's a shame. I
Isn't
thought
that
that
a
was,
shame?
yeah, it is. I mean, reaching your pension status and obviously satisfying a condition of release, a nil cashing condition of release, is probably celebration in itself, isn't it? And what could be better than
Exactly.
cracking your SMSF wine open to celebrate that and involving that along the way of that transaction? But of course, wiser people than you or I, Tracey, have gotten onto that idea and shut it down pretty quickly.
Disappointing, Darin, isn't it?
Yeah.
Disappointing. So
Yeah.
we would need to stop part of our pension, pull it back to accumulation, take the lump sum payment, then we can crack the bottle of wine. We'll be happy with that. So we do need to be careful if we do have collectible assets. What do we do with those assets moving forward? How do we, how do we take them out of the fund? Obviously, it's got to be at market value. And we don't want to fall foul of any of these rules because one of the reasons we have collectibles in our super funds is because we think there's value in those particular collectibles.
Yeah, and of course, we've gone through some of the compliance issues that individuals will face if they want to invest in these things in their SMSF.
Mm,
However, having said that, we know of a lot of cases where people back their skill with these types of assets and think, no, 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 I've got enough confidence that I'm going to pick a winner
exactly.
in this whole thing. And I'm prepared, obviously, to go through all of the hoops that I have to jump through to have it included in my SMSF. But we know that at the end of the day, they actually do pretty well out of it. So
Exactly.
it's not a path not worth pursuing. It's
Yes,
just that you have to be careful as to how to go about it. But it's
absolutely.
good. It's great to know that at least, even though you've got to go down a few steps, you can still drink your Grange Hermitage that you stored in your SMSF.
You
That
can
you
still
have.
drink the Grange. You just can't drink the Grange whilst it's owned by the SMSF, Darin. So,
Well, while we were discussing this topic off air, Tracey, who's a very good person at figuring out solutions for some of these problems, did suggest that if I had wine in my SMSF and Tracey had wine in her SMSF, we could drink each other's wines.
there you go.
So there
That's
you
not
go.
advice to anybody, by the way.
No, 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 no. We're not suggesting that you do that. I would actually suggest that if you are going to do that, please mirror each other's wine purchases so that there's no wine envy going on once you
Exactly.
if you
Imagine.
do that reciprocal arrangement, because nothing worse than sitting there drinking and thinking, hey, mine's actually better than that.
Imagine.
What did I agree to that too? But we are a bit flippant as far as that goes. We don't seriously suggest that you do that. And of course,
We do not.
absolutely, we want you to follow all of the rules surrounding collectible items, but we encourage you to do it too, because if you know what you're doing, boy, it can be lucrative.
Absolutely. And, who are we to say that someone can't make a lot of money out of some of these collectibles, Darren, and fund a very, very lucrative retirement? So, absolutely, all the power to them.
No, speaking of which, I know there's probably going to be a discussion for a different time about what sort of quirky assets that we've seen in the past or have been recorded in the
Yeah.
past as to have been held in an SMSF. But I do remember someone making the case that one individual only invested in lace products. So
Yeah.
they're an expert in lace garments and whatever else you make out of lace. That was the only thing that they invested in. Outstanding performance. So it
Yeah.
might
Amazing.
seem a bit strange. It might, and of course, again, you have to, I mean, even with the investment strategy and whatever, you have to acknowledge that, yes, I do realize I've not diversified an asset holding as much as I normally could have,
Yes.
but I've
Yes.
taken that into account and I'm confident that I can still make it work within my SMSF. So there's all sorts of these other things that we've discussed in previous podcasts that you do
Yeah.
still have to adhere to. But again, we never discourage people from making an investment that they feel can really make a difference and make it work. And we've seen it. So yeah.
Yeah, exactly, Darin. And I think that that's part of the joy of an SMSF is to be able to have that choice of where you invest your money, and it's your money at the end of the day. So provided you meet all of the compliance stuff, you have that choice, and you can choose those options that best suit you. That might have like I would be hopeless at investing in lace products, wouldn't know where to start as terms of quality and control mechanisms. But yeah, I think it's exciting. That's an exciting part about the SMSF space.
And look, pardon the pun, but there is a glass half full element to the wine storage as well,
Of
Tracey, because
course.
well, what could be better than if you do get to the day where you can actually drink your wine and access your wine, your SMSF? It's a bottle of Grange. What better reward?
I
You've
know,
you've
right?
followed all the rules, you've been patient, you've done everything right, and then you get rewarded with a lovely glass of red wine at the end
There
of
you
it.
go.
Pretty good scenario if you ask me.
Doesn't sound too bad at all, does it?
No, absolutely not. Well, I think we've pretty much run out of time again,
We
Tracy,
have. We have.
as usual. So,
Sure.
so I'd just like to thank you for joining me
My
to
pleasure.
present another one of the Trusted Trustee podcasts.
It's my pleasure, Darin. Thanks for having me once again.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. Thanks again to Super Fun Property Valuations. Now, one last thing that we should mention, and I
Mm.
mentioned at the end of the last episode, is that Tracey will be presenting on our SMSF Trustee Empowerment Day, which is happening in September. Tracey will be covering estate planning, I think we agreed on, but
That
you
is
know,
right. Yes.
certain things can change, of course, if some quirky government policy comes in between now and then. Just to let you know, so it can be on your radar, and that is it will be held in Sydney on the 16th of September. That's at the
Mhm.
Sydney Masonic Centre.
Mhm.
And we're presenting in Melbourne on the 18th of September, and that will be at the Melbourne Convention and Exhibition Centre, which I think has changed its name, but it hasn't registered in my brain as to what that new branding is. So, but they are the two venues that we will be presenting at. So, visit our website if you want to. Just there's some details on there, and no doubt we'll be fleshing out the details as we move towards the presentations days. But
Mhm.
just know that Tracey will be there to not only present to you on estate planning, but also to take some of your questions that you'd like to ask her about some of these technical
Absolutely.
issues. And it could be about collectibles.
It
So
might be.
we'll be there to answer
Collectibles and
all.
estate planning.
Well, it could be the ultimate reward, couldn't it?
It could be.
Unfortunately for somebody else, if we're talking about estate planning, but
Yeah.
that's a discussion for another day. And don't forget, if you're enjoying our content on YouTube, smash that like button and hit the subscribe channel because it will really help with our matrix. Other than that, I'd like to thank my team for producing these podcasts and obviously making sure that they're published on all of our platforms that we release this information on. And but most importantly, thank you to you for joining us. We hope you enjoy these episodes as much as we enjoy bringing them to you. And we look forward to your company again the next time we bring you the Trusted Trustee podcast. See you later.
Bye for now.